Hey, hey.
Work smarter where you want.
This is learning at its most fun.
All righty. Good afternoon, morning, everyone. My name is Jonathan Maddock. I'm with RightCapital Technology. Thank you for joining me for a partner spotlight. This week we have RightCapital. We are going to be talking about attracting Gen X and Gen Y clients with student loan planning. With me today from RightCapital, I have their VP of Sales, Ted Denbo. Ted has over 19 years of experience in financial services industry, focusing on information technology, e-marketing, technology enablement, and sales. Prior to RightCapital, Ted was the National Director of Sales Technology at Prudential Financial. During his time at Prudential, he helped develop and implement numerous award-winning platforms supporting the sales efforts internally and externally with financial advisors. Thank you for joining me today, Ted.
Thank you, Jonathan. Very excited about the program today.
Yes, me too. So let's go ahead and let's just jump right into it. So, we're going to go ahead and Ted's going to provide us with some good information about how we can, leverage RightCapital and kind of where we can go with that student loan planning. And then what we're going to do after the end is kind of just give you a couple, from the Redtail side, some best practices on how you can use the CRM to best utilize, some of the tips that Ted talks about. So I'm handing it off to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jonathan, again for the opportunity here. Let me share my screen so everybody can see it. And as mentioned, it should pop up momentarily. There we go. As mentioned, the content today is around student loan planning. As everybody probably is well aware of, this is a topic that's been quite popular in the news and also just in general conversations with clients, friends, and family members for several years now. It's something that certainly has caused a lot of concern for many folks out there and can be quite a challenging initiative to address and overcome. And we'll go through several different statistics around it, some ideas and planning opportunities with those different client types and client bases. And then, as Jonathan mentioned, we'll even show you a little bit of what you can do within RightCapital to help you with some of those potential opportunities out there. So from that perspective, I'm gonna dive right in just to highlight, the overall agenda for my content here today, and talk a little bit about the different loan types, because it's one of the most critical things from an identifying opportunity perspective. Talk about the different payment plans across the federal programs that they could potentially be eligible for. Another big one that's also been in the news quite a bit lately is around public service loan forgiveness programs, which is one of the richest opportunities as far as potential savings, but there are very specific criteria that they have to meet. And also, I'll give you some context of why many people have kind of fallen out of those programs. And then a little bit of, a review of those specific federal loan types that are eligible for these different programs. So when you think about it, like I said, it's a massive, massive challenge out there for many, many people. And you look at all the key stats across the screen, right? Over $1.5 trillion in U.S. student loan debt. That's just significant, right? It exceeds, in many cases, the credit card debt that's out there across the U.S., which is terrifying in a lot of ways. And it affects a significant portion of the population, right? You're almost 45 million Americans out there that have some amount of student loan debt. I mean, I know dozens and dozens of people that have it, even folks with very successful careers. You look at some of the other aspects of it, why this is becoming such a big problem, why you hear it talked about, and we're certainly not going to politicize any of the commentary today, but one of the reasons this is such a big issue is you look at, the delinquency rate is quite high out there for folks. They get in over their head, unfortunately, and don't have a quick way of getting out of it. You look at, other aspects of, 65% of those graduating in public or nonprofit colleges, in 2017 had some amount of student loan debt. And when we look at that, the average loan is, a little over $25,000 from public schools, and when you look at private schools, it tends to be a little bit higher, around $32,000. Some things not on the screen, just to give you context, because you may think, well, what's the opportunity there as an advisor, right? If these folks they don't have a lot of debt, maybe they're not potential good prospect or good client. Maybe there's only so much you could do to help them. You look at it also from a higher debt, higher net worth perspective. There's around 2 million people out of that nearly 45 that have well over $100,000 in student loan debt, and I believe it's just under 1 million that have over $250,000 in student loan debt. I mean, you think about, what career paths are those folks typically going into with that level of debt? It's a bit across the board, but it tends to be, a lot of those that have a very extended career paths, graduate paths, right? Attorneys, doctors, other healthcare professionals, folks in various PhD programs where maybe they will have quite a significant earnings potential down the road, but in the short term, in most cases they don't. So anything that can help them progress forward, reduce some of the debt, help them stay on the good foot, so to speak, sooner rather than later, is really going to help them achieve their goals more effectively, more efficiently, but also bring some great opportunity to you as an advisor. So when you look at that, what can you do in these cases? What are some of the opportunities? And that's where we're going to go into a bit more details around the different loan types. The other thing, and we're going to come back to this towards the end about some, best practice opportunities that I see a lot of our advisors doing, is in many cases it's probably not your clients that have the student loan debt, except for maybe some of them have some of those parental loans. But in most cases, it's the kids, it's the grandkids, it's the nieces, it's the nephews that do. And that can be a great opportunity to, where appropriate and where it comes up on the conversation with those clients, reach out and potentially, offer some solutions, some options to show those extended family members of how they may be able to address it more effectively and maybe reduce some of that debt a little quicker. That's something where we've had quite a few advisors that aren't necessarily targeting that market type or that client type, but leveraging some of the tools that we have at RightCapital, some of the knowledge that they've gained to help extend their relationship across the family, right? And that's something I know. I've been in financial services for nearly 25 years, and it seems like that's been a topic of conversation since I got into the industry around, how do we reach those extended family members? Because you guys know all the stats, I'm sure, right? Typically when a client passes, more often than not, the money moves on, and if you can build a deeper relationship with the broader family, it's a way to not only help the family, but also, maintain some of those assets within your practice. So those are just some simple stats to think about. It gives you a little context of why, this can be a great opportunity for you as a financial professional out there to not just help people, but also help grow your practice. All right, so let's get into some of the nitty-gritty details around student loans, some of the key things that you have to understand to an extent to be able to look for those opportunities. And one of the biggest things is different loan types. Now, there's different tiers here. I'm going to go through a couple of different components here on the slide. It really comes down to federal loans and private loans. Well, let's get to the one aspect that I know comes up often when presenting this content. There are limited options when they have private loans. Really, the big opportunity is around the federal loans, and that's the federal programs that we're going to talk almost entirely about here today. When it comes to private loans, typically your really only option is refinancing, which can be significant in itself. When you look at companies out there, there's tons of them. SoFi and a lot of others that have some great student loan refinancing programs, but that tends to be the only option for those folks. When you want to look at some of the numbers I just mentioned, right, $1.5 trillion in student loan debt, over $1 trillion of that sits in federal loans. So the bulk of the opportunity is in a loan type that has a lot of potential federal programs that they might be eligible for. For that other $0.5 trillion, which isn't a small number, the options tend to be predominantly refinancing. I'll give you a few comments around some other things to look into as an option, and there's lots of good websites out there. We reference many of them in the the credits and the quotes, so to speak, in here. So as noted, this will be recorded. You'll get access to it. But there are some programs at state levels that might be applicable for some private loan types. You do have to check state by state. It does tend to be around those that have public service career paths, medical professionals, doctors, attorneys, and so on. And then there's also a lot of alumni programs, for some of the bigger schools and institutions. They have very specific criteria around eligibility, but that's also something that can be looked into for those that do have private loans. But again, the options are certainly a lot more limited if they are in that loan type. When you look at the federal loans, even within the federal loans, the programs have some limitations around the different loan types. There's really three core categories, as you can see, right? The direct loans, FFELs, and other. The direct loans have the most options. You can convert many of the other loans, like the Perkins loans and even the FFEL ones and plus loans, into a direct loan. In many cases, and I'll give some examples of this, that can restart some of the clocks on timing for when they might be eligible for some of those programs that are accessible under direct loans. But it doesn't mean that they are kind of limited completely from different programs. In many of the cases, that will be something that has to be considered when looking at if they do have, let's say, a Perkins loan or some type of FFEL loan or some of the parental loans. In many cases, those might need to be consolidated down, and the timing of that could push it out from a good idea to a bad idea. And I'll try to give some context around that. And so that's one of the most important things to understand, right? Under there, it also means that there are, not just eligibility components to that, there are payment plan components to that. Again, they're going to have less options under anything that's not a direct loan type. So that tends to be, if you do find an opportunity, you are conversing with a client or maybe a family member of a client that has some student loan debt, that's one of the first things that you need to understand. What are the loans that they have? And not just one. In many cases, they might have multiple. So what are the different loans for all of them that they have, so you can assess it accordingly. Then from there, it goes into the different payment options, right? And you've probably heard the term income-driven payment plans, income-driven repayment plans. That's where we're going to talk about different types. They can be eligible on their own without a public service loan forgiveness program. They have a lot of benefits to them in themselves, switching over from just a standard repayment plan to some type of income-driven plan. And at the end of the day, well, what that means is it's a payment plan that is looking to set a monthly payment amount that is intended to be affordable or more affordable based on their income and family size. And there are different components that come into play there. We'll get into some more of those details as we go a little further into the content. But you really have four different types, and we're going to focus just on the top three. You have the IBRs, which are one of the most popular. It's a straight income-based repayment plan. That's all that IBR means. You have the payee loans. This is where, pay as you earn repayment plans. There's aspects of both the payee and the repay, right? Revised pay as you earn, where that payment amount can fluctuate based on their income levels. And the last one, we're really not going to spend much time on this. Is very less frequently used. It's more applicable to some of the parent loans out there, and that's the ICRs, or the income contingent repayment plan. Across these, they do all have some type of loan forgiveness that is associated to it. So it's not just the public service program, which has some of the richest benefits, as I mentioned earlier. We're going to go into the details on that in a moment. But all of these have some type of loan forgiveness associated to them. The plan itself is intended to, or is looking to attempt to lower the payment for the term, right? And that can be 10, 20, 25 years, depending on the different options that are selected. And at the end of that term, whatever balance is remaining is intended to be forgiven or, taken away, so to speak, right? And that's one of the nice things. That, because of the term timelines, obviously with the longer term, in most cases, you're going to see that forgiveness amount be lower. But frankly, anything that they can get out of repaying could be a good option for them, even if it's just $5,000 or $10,000 versus $100,000. One key aspect, though, to keep in mind, and this is important differentiation between some of the standard payment plans and other options, is that whatever that amount is forgiven is considered taxable income. So when that event does occur, they have to be at least aware and prepared for the fact that that's going to add on to their taxable income for that year, and it will, in many cases for folks, probably create some type of tax event, right? So when you look at it from a planning perspective, that's something you want to make sure you're factoring in when doing those projections. That's something that, again, I'm going to take a few moments and highlight a little bit of what we do in this space, because it's pretty unique. We're the only solution out there on the financial planning space that has a student loan module built into the platform. And that's something that certainly you'd want to look into to make sure that they can address or afford, based on the projection, that taxable event. So that's a little definition around the different payment plans. A few things that just gives a little more detail around it. Again, things to be aware of. There's a few timelines that come into play that impact the minimum payment amounts, right? Because again, all these are looking to reduce the payment amount. So when you look at the IBRs, there is a date that affects it. It affects it in two ways: the minimum payment amount and the term. So loans after July 2014 or targeting or looking to leverage a 10% of discretionary income for the payment amounts, and they only have a 20-year term associated to it. Loans before July 2014, you're going to see a little bump in the minimum payment amount, right? It's going to be 15% instead of 10, and the term is going to be 25 instead of 20. So again, when you're starting to really drill down and look at the opportunities for clients here, that date could push out the option, and if you look at that 25-year term, 15% of discretionary income, that could make it for, clients potentially not as attractive and maybe not a better option than just following the 10-year standard payment plan. When you look at the payee loans, right, pay as you earn loan options, again, here you're looking at 10% of discretionary income and a 20-year term. So some of the more favorable options out there. When you look at the repayee or revised pay-as-you-earn payment plans, you'll see here it's 10% of the discretionary income, but there is a difference when it comes to the term. It's 20 years for undergraduate and 25 for graduate. So again, understanding the loan types, understanding whether it's undergrad or grad school is again going to be important details to know, along with the origination or the timelines of the loans, because it all affects some of those payment amounts that would be calculated. And then, as I mentioned, again, we really won't spend much time here because it's a lot less frequent, the ICRs, income contingent repayment plans, and you can probably see why, right? It's 20% of discretionary income for a minimum payment basis and a 25-year term. So some of the least favorable options, if you look at the others available to them from both a payment amount and term perspective. A few basic things, as you can see here, it's 10%, 15%, 20% of discretionary income. What do they mean by that, right? It's their AGI minus 150% of the annual poverty guideline amounts for your family size in your resident state. That is something you'll have to look up. It does vary from state to state in many cases. It'll give you the criteria for that. So again, understanding their AGI amounts, some details about their families would be also important things to know if you wanted to calculate out what their payment options would be. The other thing that you have to keep in mind is with some of these different loan types, to be eligible for them, and they may need to qualify for what's considered a partial financial hardship. And all that really comes down to is when the IBR, the income repayment amount across different payment plans, is lower than the 10-year standard repayment amount. So that's something that you should be able to obtain from them. If you have the details there, right, and you're able to calculate those amounts, it should be easy to identify, if that's higher or lower. Obviously, if it's lower, that's because of the guidelines we just outlined there. So let's talk a little bit about the other one. This one's been in the news quite a bit, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. I know it was all over a lot of different press outlets there talking about, many people have applied for this program, but I forget the exact number, but it was a pretty high percentage failed to actually get it completed. Well, a lot of that has to do with making sure they understand the rules. And frankly, most of the folks that were not successful in implementing the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program came to that they didn't follow the guidelines. I mean, it's like anything else. If there's rules outlined, you got to follow them to succeed in the end. So that's why there's several things that are really important to understand if it's even worth looking at this path for someone, and it's all around eligibility. A big part of it is around who are they working for, right? And they need to be employed by a public service organization, and they have to be a full-time employee. Per the program guidelines, that means they got to work at least 30 hours a week to be considered full-time. The other aspect, and this ties into some of the things I talked about before, has to be a direct federal loan that they have outstanding to be eligible. If they have other federal loans, and I'm just using an example, let's say a Perkins loan, they're not eligible if they stay in that Perkins loan, but if they consolidate that to a direct federal loan, they then can become eligible. Now that will restart the clock, and I'll get to that in a moment. The payment plans, they can essentially use any of the four that we just talked through, right? If they're going to be in this program, they can use an ICR, IBR, pay, repay, or even just be utilizing the 10-year standard repayment plan option. So any of those are applicable to the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And then here's the one that usually gets people where they fall out and no longer become eligible. If they meet those other criteria, something that they have to do is they have to make 120 or basically 10 years of on-time, full scheduled monthly payments. They can't miss payments. They can't underpay payments. They have to make them all on time. And that's where a lot of people will get dropped from the program. Because if they don't stay on track, they don't pay those in a timely manner, they don't pay the full amount that's required, unfortunately, that's going to bounce them out of the program. And that is a big part of why many people did get booted from that program. So again, it's something really important for people to understand the rules, right? It's just like anything else, particularly with federal programs, you got to follow the rules explicitly or they're just not going to work. So that means there's a lot of people out there. Like I said, if you look at the different stats we talked about, when I go back to those numbers, right, 2 million people with over 100,000 in debt, a lot of those are medical professionals. And a lot of those folks may end up working at a public hospital. And I know several people that have. So there could be a great opportunity to help people there. So really, a few key things. I talked about this before. Those payments have to be made on time. When we talk about if they had a non-direct federal loan, but they had like a Perkins loan, an FFEL loan, another type of federal loan, if they consolidate it, it restarts that 10-year clock. So that's where it may not be a good option for some folks. Let's say they've already been making payments for 10 years, and they've only got 8 years left, and obviously restarting that window and having to do another 10 years, even if it's for a lower payment amount, it might not be a good solution for them because they may not end up receiving some of the balance forgiveness benefits that it could have, and it may actually extend the timeline that they're paying back the loan. So timing is a big part of it. If they're just getting into it, they've only been paying on that loan for a couple of years, and that may not be a big issue. But again, that's an important fact to keep in mind when looking at the eligibility. As noted, here's a big difference between the other if you're just on a straight payment plan. Remember with the IBRs and the pays and all those have a balance forgiveness component to it, but typically after 20 plus years. Whereas this, at the end of the 10 years, assuming they've met the criteria, followed the rules, whatever balance is remaining would be forgiven. And you could probably guess that might be a bit higher of an amount versus a 20-year term, right? Because hopefully it's shortening up quite extensively. And then the other big part of this that's quite significant, right, just the forgiveness amounts on the regular payment plans, as we noted, those are taxable. Here it's not. So that's where, again, the benefits from the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program are extensive. But keep in mind, they've got to stay in the public sector for a minimum of 10 years, right? So really, when you look at it, they've got to be intended to do that for the bulk of their career, if not their entire career. And that's not where everybody wants to go, right? Many folks are going down these paths to make a lot of money. You know, they maybe want to go private practice. They're going to be a defense attorney, whatever it might be. You know, they likely will fall out of eligibility for a program like public service loan forgiveness. So that's where, you know, understanding their career paths, understanding what they have are all tied together to whether this makes sense to even bring it up as a conversation with a potential client or a potential family member of a client. Another area that catches people with the public service loan forgiveness is employer types. So, you know, as you can see on the screen here, a few key things you can probably guess, right? All the different government organizations, federal, state, local, tribal organizations would qualify, right? So that's your DAs, you know, if they're working for the Attorney General, you know, whether state level or federal level or local government. If they're working in, you know, public hospitals, that's a big one where this comes into play. Nurses, doctors, RPNs, APRNs, and others. Organizations that are tax exempt under 50C3 IRS code. There's a lot of folks out there that work for those organization types. And then, of course, there's always some gray area with the rules with anything related to the government, right? So there are other not-for-profit organizations that are not tax exempt under the 50C3 rules, and if their primary purpose fits, they may be eligible. Like I said, that one's quite gray. So if they are outside of the top two bullets, you definitely want to let them know they need to verify that with some of the government organizations. Peace Corp and AmeriCorps are all qualifying, and then there's a lot that do not. You know, for-profit organizations, obviously. A lot of the political organizations, labor unions, many of those not-for-profit that are not tax exempt under the 501c3 rules that do not provide a qualifying public service. Government contractors that work for non-qualifying employers, they must be directly employed by a qualifying employer to count towards the public service loan forgiveness. So that's another area that gets a little gray. You know, they may think, well, I work for, you know, XYZ organization or I'm contracted by them, but that may not. That means that they're likely not eligible in most cases. So that's one that catches people quite often. Again, another thing coming right back to the very beginning of the conversation, you know, understanding the loans, the loan types, what their career path is, and what organizations they currently work for and intend to work for. You know, those are some of the critical criteria items that you want to understand before you get too deep into the conversation with any client or a family member of a client. So, you know, when you look at it, understanding the options is critical. As we highlighted, not all federal loans are eligible, but the bulk of that student loan debt out there does sit in federal loans. You know, they may be eligible for some type of payment plan in most cases. They may be eligible for public service loan forgiveness, again, assuming the client is going to meet all the criteria over that 10-year period. And if they don't, on a loan type basis, they can still become eligible in a lot of scenarios, but they would need to consolidate. You know, coming back to my earlier comments, that's where you need to understand, well, how long have they been in a program already? It doesn't make sense when you look at the numbers. There's a lot of variations in the different payment plans. One of the big ones is the date of the net borrowers, right? And coming back to one of the biggest ones is July 2014. Before and after can mean quite a difference in the amount for the minimum payment amount and also the duration of the term. And then I've already beaten this one up a good amount. Many of the federal loans are not eligible by default for the PSLF program, but they might be able to become eligible under consolidation. So before we get into some of the final comments around next steps, I want to just take a moment here. I'm going to switch over and I want to show you a little bit of what we do within RightCapital. Bear with me for 1 second. I've just got to pull up our platform here so we can show you a few things. Bear with me one second. All right. So one of the ideas, like I mentioned earlier, is connecting with extended family members if the conversation comes up around student loan debt, or you just hear that they have some student loan debt. So let me show you a little bit of what we do in this space and how you might be able to utilize it with a client or a family member of a client. One of the big things about RightCapital is our entire platform is modular. So you don't have to overwhelm them with many different components if that's the only topic of conversation. One of the things that many of our advisors do is, let's use that example. Maybe they're trying to connect with some of those extended family members. So say you're meeting with a client that's, typical client type. Maybe they're in their mid to late 50s. They got 1 or 2 kids in college. And it comes up around that they've got a good amount of student loan debt and they don't know how they're going to resolve it all. Well, this is where you can potentially send that family member, or even have it sent over to that client and let them share it with their kids. Just this one component, because you can select this by itself. You can even select what data they can enter, so it just has them put information pertaining to that student loan debt and let them play around the module, and that can lead to some great conversations, because everything in our platform can be branded with your logos, your information. Even if you don't talk to that end person, they're going to see your information, and it's going to help keep you front and center. Because the way our tool works is if they put in their loan details, or if ideally they link their loan, because in many cases they might be able to link it through our aggregation tool, it'll pull in all the details that we need to know to see what they might be eligible for across those different program types. And then from there, if you think of all the things that I mentioned are critical components, you probably guess what and why we built these questions for, is to help determine what might be a good fit or what that outcome could look like for that client. So just to give you context here, you see Jane wants to know, right, the timing of the new borrower, right? It's coming around to some of those key dates I mentioned. Are they already working in the public sector? If so, for how long? Do they intend to stay there, or are they looking to go private? Which of the payment plans did you want to look at, or do you want to just look at potentially refinancing? Because you can just look at traditional refinancing. And if it needed to be consolidated to be eligible, you can denote that. So for context, in this example, Jane has $150,000 outstanding Perkins loan. She works at a public hospital and plans on staying there. So in this case, it could be quite beneficial, right? It might save her nearly $70,000. A little over $9,000 would be forgiven. And one of the things I didn't touch upon, but some of the programs under the pay and repay, there's an interest benefit into how the interest is capitalized across the program. So if you select it and it did have a benefit, we'll actually calculate that out. So on the surface alone there, this looks like it could be a good option, right? It's going to reduce the amount paid back quite significantly, even forgive some of it. You can also look at the timeline impact. So here we're looking at, it's not just saving Jane a bunch of money, it's paying it off nearly 20 years sooner. Now, as I noted a little earlier, the different payment options have different payment amounts. So you may need to have them, or they may want to flip back and forth and see based on the different paths. Some may actually increase their payment versus their current payment over time. Others may reduce the payment but may extend it out, right? It all depends on their personal circumstances. So we look at it for Jane, this looks like this could be a pretty good option for her. I'm guessing you can probably figure out what we're doing here, right? It's looking at a PSLF, right? Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And then we even break it down month over month, year by year, if you want to get into all the payment details. So that's one item that we see many folks leveraging. Again, if they're targeting that client type, then the conversation might start here and then go into a more detailed, more broader financial plan. For those that are really using this to extend their relationship with the broader family, typically it's really just around this component to start with. In many cases, they might not even directly converse with that end client. You're just sharing some information with them, let them see some of the details and options that are out there. And around that, you can even put some notes in if you wanted to provide some additional details to that person through our platform. So those are just a couple of quick examples of some of the things that we do here at RightCapital. I'm going to go back to the slides for a few final comments, and then we'll turn it back over to Jonathan to share a few ideas, and then we'll get into Q&A. So one of the things, again, I can't reiterate this enough, there's certainly opportunity if you're looking to target that client type, the Gen X, Gen Yers, those are the ones that have the bulk of all that student loan debt we talked about. But it's also a great way to find opportunity to extend your relationship with your current client base. The key things, right? There's 3 key things that you need to know right out of the gate to determine if it's even worth pursuing a conversation around, what is the loan type? If they got private loans, again, the options are a lot less. Refinancing is probably going to be the predominant option there. And like I said, it's worth having them explore a little. There could be some state programs. There might be some alumni programs. But that's, again, very limited when you look at the broad context of federal dollars out there and federal programs. Once you understand they have some type of federal loan, you can then identify the options available there. Which payment types are they going to be eligible for? Which programs are going to be eligible for? And then build a plan around it. And that's where we think, we have a fantastic tool that helps you simplify a sophisticated conversation. Anytime you can make something easily digestible to a client, but give them a very comprehensive, very powerful review of what that could be, it's going to make it easier for them to pursue that program, which is another big point. Planning in general, right? The more engaged, the more simple you can drill it down to for the client, the more likely they are to stick to the plan. So that's something that we feel we do really well at RightCapital. And continue to look for ways to innovate in that space. And again, there's lots of content out here around this. We encourage you to do a lot of research on your own as well. In the slides and the recording, you'll see many, many links to different sites out there. We also provide these various slides and others to our customers. So if you are a RightCapital subscriber in our Help Center, you can access loads of materials, slides, even some flyers that you can leverage. Some of our advisors, host their own educational programs, like many do with other topics like Social Security and Medicare. We provide content around those as well, but you certainly can leverage some of our content if you'd like to put together a marketing program around this. And that's something where you can tie that to a lot of the Redtail features as well and use that to push it out. So if you haven't taken a look at our program, we'd love the opportunity to do that. We're going to share some contact details with you in just a few moments. But we'd love to take a few moments, show you what we can do around this and a lot of other financial planning areas, and give you the opportunity to test drive the system. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jonathan for a few moments. He's going to talk through an idea where you can take some of the stuff I mentioned here and kind of tie it together. And then we'll take some time to go through some questions if we have any.
Perfect.
Jonathan, I'll let you take it over.
Right on. Thanks, Ted. I appreciate it. That was actually a ton of good information. So I appreciate you guys kind of sharing that. And so just to kind of wrap it up and kind of bring it back, within Redtail, I think, when you're talking about using your CRM and kind of building out those relationships and kind of deciding who is the Gen X and who is the Gen Y of your database, the first thing that you're going to want to do, make sure that you're doing is tracking as much, information about those contacts as possible. And that really starts, really from, getting to know the kids of your active clients. So making sure that you're gathering that, more often than not, especially right now, and not to take it away, but you're talking about things like the wealth transfer and things like this is a great time for you to start developing those relationships around a topic that most likely they're going to be interacting, that they're going to be interacting with. So I think the biggest takeaway for me as far as to get started would be make sure that you're tracking that new, contact information. So, whether it's going into a contact record and making sure that you have the appropriate statuses that allow you to track that. So if they're not already an active client, is there a way for me to track something along the lines of child of client or spouse of client, right? So that way, yes, they're not maybe having accounts being held with us, but it's definitely a way for me to go ahead and track those other contacts that I eventually will want to go ahead and interact with down the road. So making sure that you have those, child of client available to you as a, as an option. Even like something like a dependent. I think that's what we have here. So we have dependent, and then we choose based off of, child of client or child or grandchild, whatever it might be. Because again, you might be working with, so some of your main clients or some of your active clients could very well be helping out grandchildren of the database, and having that information is going to be valuable to you. So again, segmenting out, what that looks like. Now, taking it a step further and applying it to maybe the different student loans and things like that we might have, I went ahead and just created, I think keywords is a great place for this. So if, we're going to go ahead and have that initial conversation, we're onboarding and things like that, and you're looking over accounts, adding a keyword for those, whether they're a college student or whether they have student loans. So for here, you'll see I'm going to go ahead and I have a couple. So I had the first one I have is college student would be a good one. So this is just kind of overall. This is everybody who is a college student. But then if I want to segment based off of maybe the different student loan program that they're using or the different types of student loans that they have, you can do that as well. So I'd add another keyword. I'd say keyword. I'm going to say equals to, and then you're going to see that I have, student loan fed or student loan private. So that way, as things are changing and maybe there's a new product that's coming out, or maybe there's some new, changes that are coming, you can then very quickly distinguish, hey, this is a group of people that I want to go ahead and reach out to. Well, if you're not, hopefully most of you are familiar with this, but this is a perfect list right here. I know they're college students, or they at least maybe they have a federal student loan, right? I can select all of these contacts here, and if I need to, and again, pending, compliance and things like that, you do have the ability with the CRM to then send that broadcast email, right? Maybe you have a template here that says, student loan, options, or let's have that conversation, right? And then you're starting to reach out to these people and let them know about these new products that you have available, or, sending them updated material about other options that they have, while they're going through that student loan process. And then the other one that I would say is, if we go back into a contact, is taking a look and at the different student loan programs, right? So we had here that the loan forgiveness option, right? Using the user-defined fields to then go ahead and select, hey, if I'm having multiple programs, that I can very quickly understand that this client is, yes, they do have a student loan and it's through a federal program, but also, what program are they currently using? Well, if it's the loan forgiveness, you have that information kind of right at your fingertips, and you can go ahead and segment those contacts based off of that. Then once you have that list, it's very quick and easy to then go ahead and send over into RightCapital, and you can start utilizing the power of RightCapital. So just a couple tips there. I would say biggest thing is make sure you're tracking that information, and also just getting that contact information of your child, your client's children, or their their successors, right? You want to make sure that you are gathering that, so that when things like this come up, you already have the information. You can start building that relationship. So that is kind of what I had on the Redtail side. I think it's now probably time to go ahead and just kind of share, if you guys want to do any follow-up or anything like that. And Ted, please make sure that I have this correct. sales@rightcapital.com.
That's correct. Yeah, if they'd like to reach out, whether it's for just more information about the content, the topics, our integration, or if you haven't looked at the program, you'd like to set up some time to give it a test drive, just shoot us an email at sales@rightcapital.com.
Thanks so much for joining us today for this particular session. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to give us a call at 800-206-5030, option 3 for support, or just shoot us an email over to support@redtailtechnology.com. Thanks a lot and have a great day.